Okay, so welcome everyone. Like I said, I'm the acting director of operations for Mom Stop the Harm, and I am just trying to get some of this figured out here. Okay, there we go. And so acting director of operations for Mom Stop the Harm, and welcome everyone to for joining us for today. I would like to be able to start us off with a land acknowledgement. So I would like to, so I'm just changing this gallery view here. There we go. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet here today on a virtual platform, let us take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we each call home. We reaffirm our commitment and responsibility to care for the land and to strengthen relationships between nations, to improve our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples, their unique histories, homelands, languages, cultural practices, and spiritual beliefs. So if you want to pop in the chat window as to which land that you come from, that would be wonderful. Please definitely feel free to share. We would love to be able to know. And okay, let's see if we can get this changed again here. Okay, so just a moment of there. Now we should be good. So I'm just making sure it's all looking right for everyone here. Because for some strange reason, it only lets me see Donna instead of our speaker view. Is that what everyone else is seeing? Or are they seeing my window? They're seeing my window? Okay, fantastic, perfect. I didn't want to just assume. All right, so so like I said, we're recording today's session, and we will be posting it on the Mom Stop the Harm YouTube channel. Within this next week, we should have that updated and have that happening. And then we will also be sharing in a follow-up email the link to the Mom Stop the Harm YouTube channel, as well as any additional information that is shared tonight in regards to any kind of links and where you can follow Kathy, get copies of her book and all that kind of greatness. So the other thing that we're going to be doing is if you have any questions or any comments or anything like that that you would like to share, please put it in the chat window. And then when we come to after Kathy has shared, then we'll do a Q&A time. And then I'll post the questions to Kathy and then she can respond. And then that way everyone has the full, everybody's part of that interaction of it. We don't have to worry about anyone trying to connect to audio and having any kind of technical difficulties. The other thing we're going to be doing tonight is giving away 2 of Kathy's books. So we'll be randomly choosing 2 people that have registered and showed up tonight. And so then I'll follow up. We'll announce those 2 people at the end of the session tonight. As then I'll be following up with you by email just to confirm a mailing address so we can get your book to you. Let me see, what else are we going to do here? All right, you know what? I think that's most of the formalities of anything that I had to be able to go through. So I would like to introduce Kathy. So Kathy Wagner is a member of Mom Stop the Harm and author of Here With You, a Memoir of Love, Family, and Addiction. So Kathy's going to share readings from her book, Messages of Hope After Living Through Her Son's Addiction, Recovery, Relapse, and Death. So please join me in welcoming Kathy.
Thank you so much, Tyla. And thank you so much for all of you taking the time to come out tonight or this afternoon. I'm so thrilled that there's so many of you here, although I'm also heartbroken that so many of you are here knowing that this is a topic that is very personal and probably touches you. As Tyla said, I'm a member of the Mom Stop the Harm, which is not anything I ever hoped or wanted to be. I am the mother of 3 grown children. The youngest of which, my son, had passed away in 2017 after struggling with addiction for a number of years. My oldest daughter is now 6.5 years sober after her own experiences with addiction, and I have a middle daughter who never struggled with addiction at all. So I know what it's like to be parenting a youth with substance use disorder. And I know what it's like to have lost a child. And I know that many of you here have similar experiences. And that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to write this book, so that we had It's a way of making it okay to share our stories. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that coming up. What I'm going to do for the next half hour or so is I'm going to read a little bit from my book, talk a little bit about the themes within the book, read a bit more, talk a bit more for about half an hour or so before we open it up for questions. My book came out about a month ago. It launched on September 9th. And this is the third reading that I've done since then. And what's interesting to me is that every time it's different. The first time I did a reading, it was more of a celebratory launch. There was lots of people from the recovery community in there, and I talked a lot about the recovery, Tristan's recovery, hope and healing, and how that continues to help our family today, what he found in recovery. The next reading I did was hosted by somebody who was also part of the Healing Hearts group for a while, and that was more of a cry for change and advocacy. And what I want to do today is focus more on the topics that are close to the holding hope and the healing hearts, which is, what are our shared experiences as parents who have, or family members, or who have loved ones in active addiction, or who have lost some people to drug harms. So I'm going to jump in with a reading, and this first reading takes place when Tristan, my son, is 15 years old, which is when he began in active addiction. And this is fairly early in his addiction. I was trying to get him help in any sort of capacity, medical, recovery treatments, whatever. Nothing was available to him because he was not yet wanting it. And nothing could be done unless he wanted it. And that's a whole another topic we can talk about. So this is I was trying to get him to China because I ended up taking him. He was very interested in martial arts. I ended up wanting to take him to China to study Kung Fu with Shaolin monks because that would get him away. And that was my creative problem solving. But before I could get him there, he started really losing touch with himself and losing his emotional regulation entirely. His addiction was getting pretty extreme. And that's where this scene starts. I do want to note for this is the only scene I'm going to just raise a bit of a trigger warning. There is some swearing in it. It's also some light discussion of self-harm and suicidal thoughts. And so if people do not want to hear that, you can turn me on mute for the next 4.5 minutes is what the reading is, but it's the first couple minutes that might have those that you might want to just take a break and come back for the discussion afterwards. So this scene transitions from another scene where I was chatting with my daughter and she is just leaving the house. I smiled to myself as I cleared her dishes into the dishwasher, poured my tea, and then opened my laptop to get work done. I had an important deadline the next day and wanted to double check that everything was ready. I reread the report I'd prepared, looking for ways to clarify concepts and add more rationale to my recommendations. Then a shriek pierced the silence. Mom! Tristan was yelling for me, wailing. I ran to his room and saw him sitting on his bed, head in hands, rocking back and forth. What's wrong? I asked, panicked. I need money. I need you to give me money, and I need it now. His voice was harsh, anxious, broken. He stopped rocking and looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed and sunken. He looked desperate. Jesus Christ, I froze. Then I took a deep breath. Tristan? Mom, I need some fucking money, okay? He yelled, rocking again. What part of that don't you understand? He hit his head with his hands again and again with every word he spoke. I need some fucking money. He screamed this last part, bashing at his head. I took a step forward to stop him, to catch his hands, to hold him tightly to me, to wrap him in love and safety, but I stopped myself. This wasn't like the time he fell as a toddler and knocked out his front tooth or got stung by a bee as a preschooler. I couldn't make this better with a warm hug and basic first aid. My boy was going crazy in front of me. The whole world dropped away until nothing existed except that room and Tristan and me. No past, no future, just now. Tristan, stop it. I spoke firmly but calmly. You need to stop hitting yourself so we can talk. He stopped, clenched and unclenched his fists, and looked up at me again, still rocking. His eyes were teary now. Okay, I said, good. I took a deep breath, trying to spread calmness, buying myself a moment to think. You want money for cocaine, right? But that's what got you here. It's what you need to get away from. More coke won't help you. You don't understand, Mom. You don't get it. He took a few labored breaths, and I could see he was trying to form his thoughts. Look, it's not having any that makes me crazy. If I get coke, I won't need to use it, I swear, because I know it will be there. Then I won't need it. If I have it, I don't need it. If I don't have it, I do need it, but I don't need to use it. I promise, Mom. He looked frantic, almost hopeful, searching my face to see if he'd made a clear argument, to see if I finally understood. I didn't. I was scared. It terrified me to see how Tristan's mind worked. He must have realized his logic was lacking because he tried a different tack. Mom, if I don't get something now, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't want to live like this. His voice broke with a sob. I can't live like this. I'm going to fucking kill myself. Even as those words cut me, I didn't think Tristan was suicidal. I'd heard his dad, in depression and guilt, threaten to kill himself dozens of times, always as a tactic for sympathy or something I could never quite fathom. I was sick of manipulative threats, but I was not immune to Tristan's pain. Instead of fear, my heart swelled with love and hurt for my poor, sick boy. This was the babe I held in my arms and nursed at my breast, the toddler who I taught to count by finding snails in our backyard, 1 and then 2 and then 3. The boy with a heart so big he would help anyone who was hurting, spending his last dollar to buy his sister a stuffed animal to cheer her up, or volunteering to vacuum the living room when he saw I was stressed. I had no idea how to help him now. Paying for his drugs wouldn't help him in the long run, I knew, but would it help in the short term? Would it help to get him through the next few weeks until I could get him on that plane to China? Until I could see if he could start over somewhere else without relying on substances? I looked at Tristan. Behind him, my own reflection stared back at me from his window, waiting to see what I'd do, judging. I knew I couldn't make her happy, no matter what I did. There was no right answer, only pain. Pain now or pain later. I turned away from myself. How much do you need? I'll stop right there. I know in some ways that's a difficult scene in many ways. You know, when Tristan really started to lose himself in addiction like that, and I was starting to see behaviors that were not at all, reflective of who he had been before. And I saw him in times of psychoses. And at that particular time, honestly, that was one of the darkest periods of my life. And even though subsequently, Tristan passed away at 21, in many ways, when he first entered his addiction was the hardest time for me because I didn't know. I was not holding on to hope. I did not even know what there was possibly to hope for. I had been part of a support group, and I use that term very lightly, where I learned all about addiction, but nothing about recovery, nothing about hope, nothing about holding space for our children, or nothing but, caring for ourselves. So I was catastrophizing in my mind a lot, and imagining worst case scenarios. And one of the problems with that, and one of the reasons why I wanted to kind of call out that scene, is because since that time, I've talked to so many parents who have struggled with similar things that they, do that they may not be proud of, or that they never envisioned themselves doing as parents. And it's so hard to talk about because we don't talk about it because of the stigma and the shame. And as much as we like to acknowledge that our loved ones who might struggle with substance use disorder are living amongst shame and stigma, we as parents and caregivers and those who love those people are also living with their own shame and stigma. And it's really hard to talk about it with people who don't understand. I remember at this particular time in my life, if I did try to talk about it with anybody, I would usually get some advice like, well, just ground him. And it's like, what on earth? How on earth? Like, they don't understand, right? Or give him a good kick in the butt, or if it was my kid, he would never. And it's like, I hope your kid never does, but people just don't understand. And what it did is it just drove me more within myself, because there was no point talking about it to anybody else. They didn't get it. Which is one of the reasons I'm so grateful to Mom Stop the Harm, and that they are now having the Holding Hope groups as well, because we need to be able to share our stories. And that is, again, so I wrote this book in large part to process my own feelings around my son's addiction, recovery, relapse, and death. But also because when Tristan did enter addiction, when he entered recovery, I ended up inadvertently stepping into my own path of recovery. Recovery means different things to different people. And all, that it really means to me in this discussion is that we began to become aware. I began to become aware of behaviors and thoughts that were not healthy for me, and began to practice a different way of being that felt more authentic, that felt more real, that felt more loving to myself as well as to the people around me. And through that process, and through watching Tristan in recovery, and he had spent the last 14 months of his life in recovery. And it was not linear, it was not easy, it was bumpy, but about 12 months of the last 14, he was sober. And during that time, I got my son back. I began to live for myself for the first time ever in my life. And I felt a degree of hope for Tristan, for myself, for my oldest daughter, who was also struggling with substance use disorder. And when he passed away, I was not willing to give up that hope. Like I couldn't really put my finger on it anymore for a long time, but I knew it was there somewhere. I knew I could find it again. And I knew that through writing this book, it would help me to find it. And it would also help to share that with others. And that was one of the main reasons why I wrote this book. The other thing I just wanted to touch on, because it is continuing to be an issue, although I think that it has improved since, Tristan was 15, 12, 13 years ago now. So that scene took place. So at that time, I had tried to get him into treatment. As I said, I had phoned around to every treatment center. Most did not take youth at all. And anybody who did, of course, needed Tristan's consent. Tristan did not consent. He did not see he had a problem at 15, even though he was in psychosis half the time, had been kicked out of 3 schools and was no longer going to school. He did not see he had a problem. He would not talk to our GP, although I did. I did my absolute best to provide the support to Tristan that he needed. I was an active parent, Girl Guide leader, pack mom, all of the rest of it, although I was a single mom. And I was a pretty good creative problem solver, which is demonstrated by the fact that I did end up taking Tristan to China. I was with him for the first 5 weeks, and he ended up staying there for a year during his 16th year. And so he had that year where he was substance free and exercising hard, and his brain was able to develop. He had, developed self-esteem and pride in what he was doing. And that gave him something that I felt he could come back to. But when he came home, again, he slipped into addiction again. But even with my creative problem solving, I could not find anything that could be helpful. I could not even find a support group for me that felt remotely hopeful at that time. And I think things are changing, but maybe in terms of offering support, but as for in terms of systems of care for our youth who are struggling with substance use addiction, there is still very, very little that is offered to them. And I just cannot understand why children who are 15 years old and in psychosis get to make their choices around their health care while their parents do not. So that's something that I talk a little bit about in the, well, I don't talk about anything in the book. I experience it in the book. I experience the frustration of that. I'm going to read another short scene from the book, and in this one I'm jumping way forward to the point where Tristan has passed away. So I'll go back and I'll talk a little bit more about the years that he spent in recovery, but this scene I wanted to touch on again because I think it's very relevant to the Mom Stop the Harm movement and the fact that the drug toxicity crisis is taking so many of our loved ones. I do just want to say quickly, Tristan was not addicted to opioids. He was a stimulant user. So his drug of choice was cocaine. And he died by fentanyl poisoning. So, and that's why I was always very happy when the terminology started changing from the opioid crisis to the toxic drug crisis, because there is a distinction. Right. On Tristan's 22nd birthday, 2 months after his death, my girls and I gathered at Mum's to plant a fiery red Japanese maple, under which we buried some of Tristan's ashes. I was fueled by fury. It wasn't just his death that angered me. It was the fact that people's sons and daughters continued to die in this fentanyl crisis relentlessly, day after day after day. It was knowing that I was only one in a long line of mothers burying their children, beautiful, talented, loving children. An invisible evil had snaked its way into every corner of the country, growing fatter and fatter as it gobbled up the lives of people who used drugs and those who mourned for loved ones lost, and nobody seemed to care. I was mad because no mother should need to bury her son on his birthday. Mostly, though, I was mad so I didn't need to feel the pain waiting for me on the other side of my anger. Mom had made a gift for Tristan on that birthday. Over the past year, she'd hand-knitted blankets for me and Jen and Tanis. She gave them to us on our birthdays, saying that each stitch was one hug and that each blanket wrapped us in the warmth of 10,000 hugs from her to us. She'd been halfway through knitting Tristan's blanket when he died. When the tree was in the ground and the soil patted down, she draped his now finished blue blanket over a patio chair and said, through her sobs, that it was stitched with 5,000 hugs and 5,000 tears. We stood silently, staring at the blanket hand-knitted with love and grief, and cried. Then we set heart-shaped candles around the bottom of the tree and gazed at their tiny flames. Jen and Tanis and I had each bought Tristan a birthday card in which we had written all the love that we could no longer share with him. We burned the cards and let the ashes fall to the ground beneath the newly planted tree, laughing awkwardly as the plastic-coated cards refused to burn as dramatically as they had in our imaginations. Then Mom and Jen and Tanis went inside. I stayed in the garden a while longer, looking at the tree and wondering how I would survive. I knew I would survive. I'd continue to eat and sleep and breathe. I just didn't know how I'd learn to live my life again in this new land of grief. It seemed more than I could manage. I thought about Tristan's radiant grin and how it overflowed into a goofy belly laugh. I inhaled his young man's smell, distinctive through the veil of tobacco and Axe body wash. I tasted the love in his homemade gnocchi, prepared specially for his grandma on her birthday, and felt his solid warmth as he hugged me and said, "Love you, Mom," on his way out in the morning. I remembered Tristan's beauty, his kindness, his big heart. It occurred to me I might find clues to my survival in those memories. When I was ready, I thought, I'd look for them there. one of the things that I was a Healing Hearts facilitator for a while. And one of the things that I found so powerful about that particular group was our ability to share our grief with each other in a way that people understood. And for me, there was always kind of three aspects to that, to the working through grief. And the one was recognizing the difficult feelings, the anger, the guilt, the frustration, the devastation, the misplacement or displacement. As we kind of lose our place in the world, we lose our place in the family. There's so much secondary losses that people don't talk about or don't understand. And we need a place to talk about that. And we also need a place to talk about what moves us forward, or what helps us to live with that grief in a less painful way, what helps us to find joy and connection and love and purpose and meaning in our lives, even as we carry that grief. And for me, what I kept coming back to were the things that Tristan taught me while he was alive and in recovery. And Tristan was very brave in sharing his story in a way that would help others. He was very both uncomfortable and open about sharing parts of himself. And if he felt that it was of use to somebody else, he would make himself uncomfortable. And that was a big part of his healing. And so his kind of ability to share his story is a big part of why I'm sharing not just mine, but his. There are things that I divulge in this book about him that he had never told me when he was alive. And he wouldn't have told me as alive. It was not any of my business to know. And one of the things I've talked about with my family members is after Tristan passed, he left behind some of his journals and the workbooks that he had in his treatment recovery center. And I was left with the choice: do I open them and read them, or do I not? And I know that there's other parents here who have had similar choices. And I don't know that there's, I've had discussions where it is, I suppose, ethically ambiguous as to whether it's the right thing to do or not, is to open up and read those books. For me personally, I didn't feel like I had a choice. I just needed to know my son, like right down to every cell of my body. I needed to know everything I could about my son's life. And so I read those journals. And once I read those journals and I discovered a few more things about him, they were no longer his secrets, they were my secrets. So where my son had been carrying his secrets and shame, and he had begun to work through that by sharing them with his counselors and his sponsor and writing them out, now I was the care holder of his secrets and shame, and I held them in the same way that he did to begin with, which is in a veil of secrecy. So for years after I read his journals, I did not tell anybody about what was in them, because it was too difficult for me to talk about. I didn't want to remember him through his behavior that he showed in his addiction. I wanted to remember him through the behaviors he showed when he was well and loving and connected and joyful and laughing, and such a foundational part of a family. And that's how I wanted to remember him. And one of the ways that writing this book really benefited me is I began, as I was writing things down and reading them back on the page, I could see us with a little bit more objectivity than I could as I'm living it. One of the things that was special for me was that, as a mom who lost a kid to substance abuse, I was riddled with guilt. I will always feel guilt, even though I know I did the very best I could. those feelings will always be part of that. But as I look back on the pages of this woman, not me, but the person on the page, I had so much more compassion for her than I did for me. And that helped me to show more compassion to myself and see myself more objectively. And then with Tristan and his behaviors in addiction, it took me longer to be able to acknowledge that I couldn't separate Tristan from his addiction in the way that I had a tendency to want to do. And I no longer wanted to carry on the legacy of him being open and sharing and helping others. I didn't want to carry on the legacy of that part of him that kept things secret and shameful and hidden. And so that was one of the reasons why I made the decision to share some of the things that I learned about him through his journal. Because one, he's no longer able to be hurt by anything. He was actively working on his recovery and sharing these things with others. And I didn't want to be part of continuing the secrecy and carrying stigma. I also know that so many other moms are aware of some of their kids' behaviors in addiction that is uncomfortable, to put it lightly. And it's hard to talk about. And so I wanted to step forward and say, it's okay to talk about it. Their shames are not our shames, and their shames are because of addiction, that they had very little, I personally believe that Tristan had very little choice over some of his behaviors when he was in the depth of his addiction. And that all of it can be talked about. So, but the last thing I'm going to read here deals a little bit with that, and my coming to terms with the fact that Tristan's life was complicated. I couldn't look at one side without looking at the other side. So for the first time, I acknowledged how much trauma Tristan had experienced. From our divorce, which had not been easy on anybody, and my 5-year-old boy least of all, through him losing himself in his efforts to fit in and finding comfort in the escape of using drugs. In his short life, Tristan had been bullied, assaulted, and abused, and he had also bullied, assaulted, and abused others. There was so much that I had not or could not protect him from. So much of his pain I hadn't known or understood. I'd be haunted by guilt, but for the rest of my life, I knew. I closed my eyes and felt the soul-deep pain of knowing I hadn't been able to save Tristan from the nightmares I had feared for him, knowing I had played a part in setting the stage for those nightmares through my own ignorance and dysfunction, born of generations of family addiction. Hurt people hurt people. The phrase came to me as a whisper in my mind. Yes, I countered, and healed people heal people. In recovery, Tristan had begun to heal and share his healing with others. 3 people had approached me after he died to tell me how he had saved their lives by listening to them, encouraging them, and believing in them, and by sharing his struggles and sobriety with them. His sister, Jen, was one of those people, and who had inspired my own journey of recovery, if not Tristan. To heal, Tristan had needed to acknowledge his challenges, his actions, his trauma, to share them with others and to own them. With work and time, they might have been transformed from shameful secrets that pulled him down into strength that brought him compassion and insight to help others. Like alchemy, his pain and trauma may have been transformed, but they would never have gone away. They had been part of him. By denying Tristan's troubled soul, I realized I'd been denying his experiences, his budding strength, his wholeness. I'd been denying his hard work and healing. I remembered all those years when I had separated my son from his addiction, whether it was his gaunt face and vacant eyes, or a disgusting bedroom filled with garbage and worse, or the profanities he hurled at me. I had labeled that his addiction, not him. It was true on some level. I knew without doubt that Tristan's soul, the essence of his being, that part that made him Tristan, could never be marred by addiction. We all have an impenetrable kernel inside us that shines with our brightest potential. but that's the source of our divinity, not our humanity. Separating Tristan from his addiction had comforted me, but it was a luxury that he had not been able to afford given the reality of his human existence. Even when his addiction had hijacked his mind and taken control of his life, as I knew it had, Tristan was right there along for the ride, sometimes enthusiastically, sometimes passively, and other times as a resisting hostage fighting for his life. Whichever way, he was there, living those experiences, having those thoughts, taking those actions. He lived with the damage of his addiction every minute of every day, and then put in heroic efforts to stop the damage and wherever possible, reverse it. His addiction was him, just as surely as he was so much more than his addiction. Yes, Tristan had been good and loving and kind-hearted, and he'd done bad things. Tristan had been thoughtful and empathetic and generous, and he'd been abusive. It was not one or the other. It was both. Life on life's terms, I thought. I didn't get to pick and choose the terms like I was ordering from a menu. We get what we are given. Those thoughts soothed me. I could feel a softening within, a stillness where there had previously been struggle and acceptance. I was no longer defending Tristan or myself. I would always have regrets, as I knew Tristan had. We had both done things we'd been ashamed of, but we'd also both done things we could be so proud of. We'd done our best, and I could be okay with that. I wondered how Tristan's life would have unfolded had he lived. Would he have landed solid in recovery, learned to love himself, and helped others to heal? I liked to think so. Or would his addiction have kept him in pain, a hurt person who continued to hurt himself and others? I knew that was also a possibility. Oh, Tristan, I said out loud, how would you have shown up in the world if you had had the chance to keep living, to keep fighting? Silence answered me. On a whim, I stood and walked to my closet. Reaching to the top shelf, I pulled out the carved wooden box where I kept knickknacks and found the green silk bag that held a deck of tarot cards inside. I hadn't used them for years. I took the cards to the living room, shuffling them as I walked, and repeated the question. Tristan, how would you have shown up in this world had you lived? I sat on the couch, drew one card from the deck, and placed it face up on the coffee table. It was the sun. I looked at the large, shining sun and the joyful infant riding a white horse. It was the one card that personified health and happiness, freedom and fun, optimism. I smiled, laughing at myself for feeling relieved by the flip of a card, but I was happy to take that as a message from my son. I placed the card on top of Tristan's journals and workbooks, tucked them carefully back in their bag, and returned them to the closet. Tristan had not survived to continue his healing journey and carry his message of hope forward, but I had. And I think with that, I'm trying to think if I have anything else to say that I really want to say, or whether that's about wrapping it up. I do have other things I can talk about for sure, and I'm happy to if people don't have questions, but maybe we'll take a break here. And Tyler, are there any questions in the?
Yep, so we do have a couple questions for you. So the first one is a member or an attendee that has shared that they are also writing a book about the loss of their daughter that was 2 years ago, and would like you and would and like you would never have betrayed her trust at that time. Now she's feeling that she needs to share the gory details in the hopes that it would affect change, and yet there are some things just simply can't because they are really quite horrific. Was there anything you chose not to include because it was so shocking?
I was very careful not to gratuitously add details that were not necessary. So my book is intended to be a book of hope. Ultimately, at its core, I want people to come away with it thinking, oh, I'm understood, I'm not alone, and there is hope and a path forward. So if something did not move that idea forward, I did not include it. So for example, I did talk about some of the things that Tristan did. I was aware of some specific details that could have been very titillating, in the same way that, people like to stop and crane their head at a car accident to see who's damaged, but that has absolutely no benefit to anybody. So I absolutely withheld details that did not move the purpose of my story forward. I didn't hide anything. As far as my son goes, there's certainly things that I did not talk about with people who are still living that could have been of interest to the story. But again, I try to stay very centered on, what do I need to tell in order to tell my story of living through this and the things that I have learned through it. And most of that did not require a lot of details around Tristan's life.
The next question was, what is it that caused Tristan to finally want recovery?
Yeah, good question. He'd been in and out of periods of sobriety because he was in China for a year studying kung fu with a Shaolin monk, which was an amazing experience for him. He came home, went straight back into drugs, and wanted to go back to China again. And I tried to convince him there was other routes. He went back there, came home, went back into drugs, managed to get him through culinary school. So he had skills, he had marketable skills. He loved the kitchens. He loved cooking. He had a huge passion for food, for eating it, for cooking it, touching it, tasting it. And he ended up working in some of the best restaurants in Vancouver. He was working at Hawksworth. He worked at Marina Side, Provence. He was, and that was his life. Shortly after his 19th birthday, I moved him out of my house. I set him up in a shared home, paid his, deposit and half month's rent, bought him groceries, and said, okay, I'm done. Of course I wasn't. I continued to save him multiple times. But about 9 months after he moved out, he got to the point where he couldn't hold a job. He couldn't, because every paycheck just took him out. And then he would quit rather than get fired. And he would repeat that. He was increasingly just becoming unwell and unable to function. So he was on the brink of getting kicked out of his home. And he knew at that point coming home was not really an option. He was just so unwell at that time. And it was either treatment or homelessness, to be honest, at that point. So he chose treatment when he was 20 years old. And I do, just one quick for, different, I know there's lots of parents here who have kids who have had all sorts of different experiences. Tristan did enter an abstinence-based recovery program. Again, he was not addicted to opioids. He was addicted to cocaine. And that was he found his home there. Like, for the first time, aside from his Kung Fu friends in China, for the first time, he found his community, his connection, his home. Like, he felt like he was in the right place at that time for him. And he loved his recovery friends, and he loved doing the work. And, that oversimplifies it. Obviously, he had relapsing tendencies. It was not easy for him by any extent of imagination, but he kept coming back. It was very much his North Star after he entered recovery. And I strongly believe he would have always kept coming back had he had the chance, if he had not been poisoned by the drug supply.
So this one is in regards to you as an author. So a bit of a combination of questions. Did you have any help writing your book? Did you attend a writing group? And did you have any previous writing experience?
Yeah, that's what I was going to talk about if there was still time at the end. I did all of those things to some degree. So I have worked with words for decades, but I have no creative writing experience. So I've been trained, and I've worked as a technical communicator, as a web writer, and a content strategist. So I understand words and the importance of editing and things like that, structure of content, but I'm not a creative writer, and I hadn't been a creative writer. So that was a whole nother ballgame. And I knew enough about writing to know that I knew nothing about writing and I needed help. So I I took courses at starting at SFU continuing study courses, just creative nonfiction, short stories. And then I joined a program that's actually operated out of kind of Seattle, a woman in Seattle, called the Narrative Project, Get Your Book Done, which is a 9-month program with writing coaches and critique partners designed to help you get your book done over that period of time. I also was lucky to have been awarded a retreat at the Banff Center for the Arts in 2019 over the summer, where I worked with some mentors there that coached me, and I did some writing. I did another round with the Narrative Project. I hired editors on 2 occasions because I needed that help. You know, it was interesting. I had never, the book that I wrote was not the one I set out to write. My first draft of the book actually ended with Tristan's death because I had no intention of writing through my grief. And I think that was just because when I decided to write the book, I didn't know enough about my grief to think that there was any value to it. Like, why on earth would I want to put that in anybody else's space? I hadn't learned enough about it I hadn't processed it enough at that time. So I put the book out to beta readers, early readers, and they gave me a lot of encouragement about where it was going, some good suggestions, but they all said, like, you can't end it here. This is not, I don't want this ending. I said, yeah, I didn't want that ending either. But that's the ending. They said, no, that's not the ending. Keep writing. So then I added, and I kind of wrote through the grief part, which is good. It helped me process it, but it helped to, I think, show that there's always life. You know, as long as we are breathing, there is life. As long as our children breathing, there is life, and there is hope. As long as we're breathing, there's life and there's hope. And I think, you know, it kind of, my experiences through grief mirrored in many ways my experiences of living in my son's addiction, and then in his recovery, finding hope and finding my way again. But yes, very much. I had all sorts of help. I was part of some writing communities online that, you know, we chatted with and got feedback. I have been part of a writing group that has met every week for the last 4.5 years, and we read things out to each other. So it is so far from a solo venture. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So the next 2 are actually a little bit of a combination of 2 questions, but that actually really feed into each other, as well as a bit of a comment. So it was posed as to, how did your daughter handle Tristan's addiction? Their son has struggled with the energy that it takes to help his sister, as her life was very complicated, which is a word that they use very often. And then the next question, which ties into it, is any suggestions as to how we can better help our loved ones' siblings?
Yeah. I almost want, I won't do it, but I want to read a scene from my book that shows. So Tristan had 2 older sisters. Tanis, my middle daughter, as I said, she never struggled with addiction, had very little patience for it. And I don't blame her, because she did not get a lot of attention because she was sandwiched between 2 kids, with substance use disorder. My oldest daughter struggled with alcohol from an early age, and had her own kind of addiction issues. I will get back to your point, but as context, so I had 3 kids. My oldest probably needed more attention than I gave her, but by the time she was really showing signs of being worrisome, I kind of compared, in my mind, I imagined it as like, if Jennifer, my oldest, was like a toddler running around with a sharp pencil, and, you know, all things being equal, you want to go and stop your toddler from running around with a sharp pencil. They're going to fall and poke their eye out or whatever. You know it's going to happen sooner or later. I had Tristan, who was like a toddler running around with 2 sharp knives heading straight into the freeway. So that's where my attention was going. Meanwhile, Tanis, my other child, wasn't running around at all. She was sitting safely tucked up on her bed in her blanket. So she got very little attention from me. And that I'm not proud of. And I don't know what else I would have done differently, because I needed to save my toddler, who is running full steam into traffic. So that being said, my middle daughter, Tanis, was the most resentful. Jen, at the time they were all living at home, she was doing her own thing, wasn't too affected by it. But Tanis was, and she actually resented her sister's addiction more because they're girls close in age. My older daughter stole clothes and stole stuff from Tanis, and so she really resented that, and she's continuing to work through that, even though my daughter's 6.5 years sober now and hasn't stole a thing from her. But it's hard. Tristan would ask people for money all the time and create environments that were hard to be around. I don't have the answers to your question of what we should do to support siblings. I don't. When I was in that period of time and I was raising my kids as a single mom, I couldn't even find support for myself or my son, let alone the siblings. What I would encourage now is, again, finding people to talk to. There are more support networks, and if those siblings would join and be active in a support network, I think it would be invaluable to be able to share experiences with other siblings. Again, they're going to make their own choices about what they want and what they're comfortable with. But I think that the more we can share our experiences in a healthy way with each other, the more we can listen and hold space for other people's feelings, the better it's going to be. I don't personally think it is helpful to pretend things are not as bad as they are, or to try to get people to think positively. Like I do, I talk a lot about that, at the heart, my book is one of hope and recovery, but it's not, glossed over as if there was nothing to recover from. Right? There's trauma there. And in any family where there's addiction, there's trauma, and the siblings are experiencing it. So I think that the more space you can give for those siblings to explore and express those feelings for themselves, whether that's through therapy or support groups or to themselves or friends, I think the better. But that's one that I don't have a clear. That's something I have struggled with as an afterthought more than did that effectively in the moment.
Okay, so just one last, I know it was more of a comment that was posted in the chat, but maybe just some ways that, because I'm sure you had the full experience of it, on with bringing your story to life to be able to share with others. Of course, we all know that is a lot of strength and a lot of internal learning, about ourselves and our journey and our loved ones, and just so much that goes into it. But of course, then also, the world is very full of, stigma and the shame that it makes us feel. And, so how have you been able to work through that to be able to come to the point of where you are now, to have a published book and to be able to do such a presentation like today?
Slowly, in small bite-sized pieces, and also with a huge streak of stubbornness. I remember early on in my process, I read a version of a story out, or maybe I just told my mom, I can't remember, but I shared with my mom that I was going to share the scene that I first read with you, where I ended up driving my 15-year-old son to a drug deal and giving him money to buy drugs. And she said, "You can't share that. You can't write about that." And I said, "What do you think this book is going to be about?" I was like, if I can't share my experience, like so you can't, like, people won't understand that. Right. So I think that the way to break down stigma and shame is to share our experiences. So to me, it's like every time I was confronted with the idea of, oh, I don't want to say that, that's shameful, I don't want to say that, people will judge me, or there's stigma around that, I was a bit like, F that, we need to stop that. And the only way I knew how to stop that was by talking about it, and talking about it in a way that wasn't judgmental. And one of the things that I tried to do, well, I didn't try to do, I was firmly committed to doing, was writing about my experiences in a way that were fundamentally non-judgmental. And I had a number of editors coming to me and say, you know what, you should like have this voice of wisdom saying, saying that, oh, you did this then, but now you have learned something. And I'm like, no, honestly, I haven't learned what is the best thing to do, because one thing the only thing that I learned is that when you are parenting a kid in addiction, it is freaking hard and it is an impossible task. And I think that any parent who is operating from a place of good intentions and love is a freaking hero. And whether that means they're taking their kids to the drug deal and paying for their drugs in that moment, or whether that means that it's tough love and they've shut the door on them, I'm not here to judge, because I know how hard it is. And only you and your kid know what is best for you in that moment. And we are all dealing with, our abilities and our inabilities and our strengths and our deficits, and we do the best we can. And I wanted to create a book that showed a family who did the best they could. And in some ways, there were behaviors that absolutely are riddled with judgment and stigma and shame. And there was a whole bunch of love in our family, and it brought us together in the end. And so I guess that's what I just kept coming back with, was that this shame and stigma arises from a place of secrecy and inability to understand. And that is broken down when we share our stories and when we listen to other people's stories with an open heart.
I think that was very well said. Thank you, Kathy. So realizing that we are just finishing up as far as the time that we have allotted for today, I just want to thank you very much for, not only taking the time today, but as well sharing your book. And I think we could probably just continue talking and talking nonstop. And I think that's just what we do when we come together as, whether it's as moms or whatever role, the fact of the topic that brings us together, we can just grow just within that conversation. So thank you very much. I greatly appreciate all the work that you've done in sharing and taking that time to, put it on paper to be able to share with the rest of us, but as well as your time of like reading it and sharing your experience with us. I will make sure that Kathy sees all of the comments on that. I know there's lots of thank yous that are just flooding in. So I'll make sure that she sees the chat window before everything is ended. And I just want to remind everyone too, so we do have, if you're not a member of Mom Stop the Harm, or maybe you haven't joined a Healing Hearts or Holding Hope group, please know that that is always an option that we have. So you can go to our momstoptheharm.com website and you can join either Healing Hearts or Holding Hope and get to know more about them at least, as well as then they'll also redirect you to our Healing Hearts and Holding Hope groups. You all have my email address from registering, as well as you'll be getting some follow-up email from me with the link, and of course all the links that Kathy will be sharing, so you can follow her on social media, as well as where you can get her books and such. And I'll include the links for our website as well. So like I said, there's lots and lots of thank yous coming in and just the appreciation. And it's wonderful. I want to say, go ahead, Kathy.
I'm going to just say one last thing before I stop and thank everybody. And it is, I'm apologizing a little bit for the shameless self-promotion, but getting this book out into the world in people's hands is a difficult task. And I think that there's a lot of people who need it. I've been hearing a lot of very positive responses. I just wanted to let people know that there is a book club guide, and that link will be out in the email that Tyler sends as well. It's a great book club read because there are controversial things, there's things to talk about, and it will help to open conversation. So if you have a book club, know anybody with a book club. Also, if you do read it and if you do find it meaningful, I would ask you to please just take a few minutes and do a quick review on Amazon, stars and like 2 words. It makes all the difference in getting that book out and shared with more people. So please, I would really appreciate it if you could do that. And it's also a good Christmas gift for people who might be struggling. Okay, that is the end of my promotion. Thank you. No more of that.
That's all right. All right. So on that note, so just random names of people that were able to attend that will be receiving a book, and I'll be sending a follow-up email just to get your address so we can get a book sent to you. So Jill Armstrong and Judith Brooke are our recipients of today's session. So you'll be receiving a book, and like I said, just watch for my email to confirm your address, and we'll get that shipped off to you right away.
May I tell you, I already have the book and I've already read it.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah,
All right.
and I did the review as well. So
Oh, wonderful. I love it. You're setting, you're being a leader within the group. That's wonderful. All right. So, Judith, I will leave it to you then, to maybe someone whose name you see on the screen, and you can choose as to who will then receive your book.
oh gee. What a responsibility. Oh my
The
God.
pressure is on.
Somebody with I'm not even looking. Somebody with the word, with the initial that start, or the name starts with a B.
A B. Okay, let me just quickly look here.
I see a Brenda Warden.
There you go.
Perfect. Brenda. All right. Perfect. We have chose. I love it. All right. Well, wonderful. And I will say a big thank you to everyone. And like I said, I'll be sending the follow-up emails and such like we described. And thank you again for taking that time, joining us today. And definitely feel free to check out our YouTube channel. All you have to do is go to YouTube, check or search Mom Stop the Harm. And today's session will be on there before you know it, as well as any other sessions such as this that we have done. We've had a wealth of wonderful people coming forward, sharing their stories, sharing their knowledge. Yeah, and if you have ideas of speakers that you would like to see, please definitely just let us know, and we will pull that together and make that happen as well. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you so much for coming out.
Thank you.